The 16 responses you're going to be having, but just really come into this with a sense of joy. No, people aren't going to be like analyzing what you're saying, but and they'll be you're going to be in the presence of people who are really excited about this and really excited about you doing this, and they've been supporting you. They want to support you, and so just be authentic and bear witness to your life with it. It's your heartfeltness that really uh, is an offering to the Sangha. And yeah, this is not a test of your long-windedness or how perfectly you understand each of the precepts or can explain them. Don't explain them. Uh, yeah, just or try to be funny or anything like that. Just one or two sentences that come from your heart on each of these. And you can send me a draft of what you've written if you'd like, and we can talk over. I'm really more than happy to do that. But also, if you sort of feel like good with it as it is, you can let me know that too. This is just what I'm feeling, and we don't need to particularly go over it, and that'll be fine with me as well. Any questions about any of that, or thoughts about that, or going okay?
I haven't started yet, but yeah, I think what I'll do is do a draft and send it to you, Kirk, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm not quite sure.
Hmm. All right, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I haven't gotten mine to you yet, Kirk. I've had a bit of a busy week.
No, there's no hurry. Yeah. We aren't supposed to, according to the schedule. It absolutely is going to be ironclad and followed at every single step of the way, but not for another month or so. So, but I know some people are starting to think about it, so I wanted to throw that in. So tonight we're looking at Precept 8, not withholding the Dharma assets, and I'm wondering what you think about this. But for many people, for me too, there was, as part of the catharsis, the natural catharsis that often comes with starting to really enter into the Dharma, entering into practice. It's very natural for there to be times when there's a lot of grief or discombobulation or disruption. And one of the big things that come up for many people is just a sense of what I've withheld from my life up until now, and now I can see how what so now I'm getting a better sense of what wholeheartedness is, and I've have I lived a life unlived as part of this, and so this is sort of goes to the heart of that. This precept goes to the heart of that experience of what has it been like when I have withheld myself, or when I've been absent from my life or the life of other people, or when I've withheld my love, my generosity, my presence, whatever it is. And I'm just noticing, I mean, this is statistically true that natural generosity is a very joyful thing to have in our lives when we discover how wonderful it is to give to others, to give a present to someone that you know they're going to love. You know, that's one example, but also just natural generosity of being in a community where natural generosity, mutual dana, comes up, is just a very wonderful thing. And how tightness and stinginess just shrinks, can feel like it's shrinking us to some degree. And these are natural things to have happen. It's not like we're always going to be just sitting there in an open book and handing out our wallet to strangers on the street. So there's a give and take with this, but not sparing the Dharma assets is looking at, again, not so much a behavioral norm, but what is it at the root of this sense of withholding? What is it to particularly withhold Dharma assets? Um, so, yeah, maybe tonight we can explore this a little bit, examining where it is that we do find that we are stingy. Is that, in terms of emotionally, in terms of our money, in terms of our energy, time, uh, and where is it? What drives that? Is there a lack of fairness that we feel like, or that we need to guard ourselves in some way? I thought it just maybe I'll just stop there if anything has come up for anybody around this so far. this idea of stinginess and withholding, and how that's a natural thing to have happen, and what drives it for us when we notice it.
Yeah, I can share. Hmm, I hadn't, like, it was already hitting me, but then it went another layer deeper when you started asking what's the root of it. And um, the thing about hearing the word fairness, I can definitely feel that something in me moves in response to that. Um, yeah, what I wanted to share was that this, long before I knew it was a precept, this like ethic as an ethic has tested me for as long as I remember. And yeah, being taught to be generous, and somewhere along the lines realizing that I was resenting the people that I was being generous to. Um, and yeah, I got some I contemplated that, and I got some various different teachings on that, including like, yeah, don't be generous if you don't actually want to be generous. Um, and for a long time now, my work has more been in the space of, yeah, recognizing when I actually want to be generous, and actually choosing to withhold. I think there are ways in which I withhold that I'm probably not as aware of, but there are some ways that I like didn't withhold, and learning to withhold has been a bit of a struggle. And in the path of like choosing to withhold somewhat, finding I have a lot of judgments about myself, and sometimes judgments from others that I'm being stingy. And I find that really hard because of how long I've spent trying to be generous, and often to my own detriment, and often to the detriment of others too, ultimately. Um, but hoping, yeah, more and more that I can land um, in this space of feeling like I have enough, and then I am moved to share rather than sharing in order to fulfill something or get something or avoid being wrong or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Karen.
Share next. Um, uh, I suppose for me, it's like a spectrum of generosity in the world. So I know people that are so far more generous than I feel I am. But then in my own life, it's sort of it's in different places. I might be more generous there and less generous there. So it's quite interesting to reflect on it. But for me, I was just reflecting back to the retreat, and when I'm not in a very rushed world, in my mind and body, speech, um, there is more of a feeling of generosity coming from me. Um, so, so I suppose, yeah, I'm aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm feeling really, I mean in terms of generosity with time, I suppose, which with people, which listening, everything, which to me is really, I suppose, what I'm focusing on with generosity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose that was a bit of a wake up, and reflecting on that is probably knowing that now I've stepped back into my life, which I've made very busy, and it doesn't really need to be, but it's happened that way. Yes, that there's time that kind of shrinks sense of that sense of generosity of yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, don't know whether that makes sense, but okay, thank you.
I'd like to share about my husband, who I think is possibly the most generous person I have ever met and probably will ever have known. People often talk about Steve's generosity like it's this like legend amongst amongst our neighborhood or something like that. I don't know. But just to give you like one example, so like Steve, my husband does tree climbing and he's quite proficient at it. And he's got through the organization that we run, we have a lot of connections with industry and other climbers and stuff like that. And he went to this conference in China, and there was some students from Ghana there, some university students, and it was to do around canopy science. So you had to climb up into these trees to be able to access the canopy to study it. And these Ghanaian researchers basically said, well, we don't have the money to do this. We're a really poor country. We can't actually access the canopy at all. Literally, Western universities come over here, do the research, take all the data, and we're kind of like left with nothing. And Steve was like, all right, this is unjust. So he like organized like two of his mates that are professional trainers to fly to Ghana. He raised something like $18,000 worth of like climbing equipment to get donated through all his industry connections. Ended up trying to crowdfund his like tickets, which were like $3,500 each. Couldn't manage it, but ended up just paying it out of his own pocket anyway, just to fly to Ghana to train these people to tree climb so they could undertake their research. And like that's beyond like anyone's usual like level of that they would go to. And it's really funny when I ask him about it, because I say to him like, like we've undertaken months of work to get this to happen for these people that you barely know, like why? And he doesn't really answer, and he just kind of brushes me off, and he's like, oh, just thought it was a cool opportunity to go to Ghana. um there's been some really interesting observations that I've made when I've seen him like move through the world and be this generous being that he is. One of them that it's contagious. Like if you're generous, people will be generous back. Like they've done research basically like if you have a friend who says that they donate 5% of their income to charity, then you're more likely to donate money yourself, because when we see our peers behaving in a certain way, we undertake these behaviors ourselves. And so like I feel like Steve's just going through the world being this really generous soul, and it's spurring all these other people to be generous as well. And the opposite is true too. When there is people who kind of like either don't appreciate it or kind of like are not really that grateful for it, or like stingy in other ways, I see Steve kind of mirror that behavior. So if someone like if I'm being stingy in some aspect, he'll kind of mirror that as well. But also too like this, yeah, it's just a really interesting and beautiful observation that I've made. And from him I've just kind of really learnt how to be generous without expecting anything back in return. And it's a wonderful freeing thing that I can just like give something to someone and just not, it just is what it is. And yeah, it's a really, really lovely way to live, and I'm very grateful that he's taught me that. So yeah.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things. Oh, sorry, Alan, are you going to say?
You can go.
No, I talk too much. Anyway.
Okay, thank you. My reflection in this, so also coming from the session from last week, and one week on, I feel like some parts of the session are still permeating my life. Like June mentioned about having a mind that is not rushed. And I've experienced lately enjoying the morning walks that I take in the morning, the walks around the river where I live, and just and getting a sense of how nature is generous in its own way, in the sense of how wholehearted nature is. Like, okay, when the sun shines, it shines. It really does, and it doesn't hold anything back, right? Or when the wind blows, similarly. Um, and this sort of wholeheartedness and generosity is nice to sometimes appreciate it. Just how wonderful it is, and how it's a great model for how to give oneself. The this precept of not being stingy, it's similar to the precept of not speaking of others' faults or not putting oneself above others. There's an opposition between, so the other one has opposing myself versus you, me versus you, and this one is specifically about mine versus yours. Um, and I was also reflecting on this idea of ownership. Owning things to a great extent is a social construct, isn't it? Like, it's just an agreement that we all agree that what we own. Like, for example, I bought this sweater, I paid for it, and I got the receipt, and now it's legally mine. Like, I own this. But it's mainly for convention and order, so there's no chaos in the world, right? Okay, this is mine, that's yours, and we all agree. So I won't take your jacket, Kirk, because that's yours, and you don't take my sweater. Um, but it's all conventional, and in a way, it's not real. It's like pretend. But what's interesting is how sometimes we get caught up identifying with what we own, like or if maybe not material things, but even less tangible things like our talents or our skills or the things we produce. Like sometimes I write poetry and I feel, oh, this is my poem, and no one else wrote it. It is my own idea, and these are my own words, and I arrange them, so it's mine. And sometimes I feel attached to the idea, and I completely forget it's not 100% mine because I have read poems, and those poems must have influenced what I wrote, or something happened to me. Like in Buddhism, we talk about causes and conditions coming together, and enabling this thing. So I cannot really 100% claim it to be mine, in a way. Um, and yet, sometimes I strongly identify with it. And sometimes I even take offense, when people comment on, "Oh, that's not a very good poem," or something like that. Yeah. So I guess where am I going with this? Yeah, this opposition between mine and yours is interesting because in many ways it's just made up, and yet we cling to it so tightly.
Mm. I love that you brought nature into this, though, the sense of nature doesn't own anything, or
Mm.
the world doesn't own anything. And yeah, and how we step in and try and create something different around that.
I think you're doing really well, Alan, if you're only sometimes getting offended when people criticize your poems.
Um, that's really interesting, Alan. Sorry, I just wanted to comment on that. I I was lucky enough to spend some time in the Amazon with an indigenous community there, and they operate on a completely non-capitalist society of basically when someone gets money or gets something in the community, it's distributed amongst everybody, and that's how they operate, and that's how they deal with scarcity, is the fact that, like, well, I have something now, so I have to share it with everybody, because there'll be a time when I don't have anything and someone else will be sharing with me.
Mhm.
And just how that differs from what we've built in a capitalist society where we're so stingy with everything. And yeah, so yeah, sorry, I just Yeah.
I've forgotten where I heard this, but there's maybe been Tyson Yunkaporta that's saying that the very best place to store excess food is in my neighbor's belly. That's gonna do the most good for all of us. And there's this
Mm.
idea that's been running through some of the comments already, just, to act or to see on behalf of the whole picture, that my neighbor, the people around me and so forth are part of the picture. There was a great story, and this is coming out of what you said, June, around the sort of natural uh, at easeness or lack of hurry, and also just that how our sangha, sessions are set up on mutual generosity, mutual dana all the time. But there was a woman that was coming out of session, and as she came home, she was stepping out of her car. Someone came up and pointed a knife at her and said, "Give me all your money." Tried to mug at her, and her first response was like, "Oh, do you think this is a good idea?" Her concern was like, "Oh, this is a terrible idea," and the guy just ran away. Acting on, like this isn't like me and mine. It's like, oh no, this is a terrible thing to do. We shouldn't.
Yeah.
We.
Mm.
Other thoughts that came up, if any?
I think I've been attracted to this one from when I read about it because I think it goes to the thing that sort of pulled me towards Buddhism as opposed to meditation, um, which was reading the Pema Chodron book Start Where You Are, which is like, yeah, Tonglen meditation. But yeah, I think the idea that all of your flaws and bad qualities are the very stuff that you need to start with and like embrace. And I remember, yeah, at the start she said, like, even if you're the most full of rage, if you're the most addicted um, person, like that's the perfect place to start. And I think, yeah, that's just something I needed to hear at the time and felt quite radical. And that feels like a kind of generosity in not excluding um, the good and the bad, I suppose. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I think at the moment I think knowing how sweet that can taste is, I guess, causing me like some pain because I feel like I lose that feeling and I don't know why. And I feel like I can't get it back. And yeah, I just feel like I'm like drifting through the world like a ghost or like a shell. Um, yeah, which I kind of feel just like traveling alone in Japan. Um, and feeling like I should be like so present and like observing everything. And yeah, uh, yeah. So I feel like I've known how good it feels, but also I guess I'm attached slightly to wanting to feel like that.
Mm-hmm. I I really identify with what you say there, Alex, and I'm aware of in myself how sometimes when I notice a flaw in my personality, which are many, um, I had adolescent children, so I know all about my flaws. um, but I can come to them with the idea of looking at them as flaws, as opposed to recognizing the roots of my flaws and seeing what was that, like that little kid I think I mentioned before that threw the block at my head because he wanted my attention. Did I say that story already? Yeah. What was my intention in acting the way I acted or the way I act in those situations, and how can I be kind to myself? How can I act with generosity to myself in those situations? And look at it from that point of view. It's interesting. This is about the Dharma assets, right? Not withholding the Dharma assets. And the Dharma assets formally are those six paramitas. But the first one is dana and generosity. That's the roots of all the perfections. Generosity, dana. There's ethics, precepts as we're doing now, there is, someone help me with this, Kshanti, patience, um, diligence, virya, uh, zazen or samadhi, and then what's the last one? Oh, wisdom. Prajna. But it starts with dana and starts with generosity. And notice how when in cultivating in our practice, the paramitas are offered to the world, and in taking up this dana or being willing to not withhold from any situation, how all the precepts and the paramitas come out of that in a way. Hmm. So, uh, thinking about this in terms of where am I most stingy? Where am I most likely to withhold, and what is the cause of that is helpful. Do I hold back from wholeheartedness in my relationships, or in my expressions, or what am I afraid of losing when I don't want to give my time or my money or my energy to something? And just really understanding what goes on for us in those situations. Susan has a koan that she offers around this one. Am I divided? Is nature divided, first of all? What separates nature from itself? Is there such a thing? And am I also as an expression of the world? Am I divided? What is the undivided way if I am? What are there divisions in terms of how I preserve life or enter into the reality of interbeingness with this? Um, I'm wondering, we usually break up into small groups and we can do that again, but I wonder just for take 5 minutes to before we do that to offer people if you have a piece of paper in front of you, just to do a quick speed write on this theme as a way of sort of getting some ideas on paper. I see some of you writing already, so maybe that's you getting a head start on it. But would you like to just take 5 minutes and do a speed write on this idea of not withholding the Dharma assets? Um, I'll read the Dogen and Bodhidharma quote if I can find them. I'll read them later because I can't find them right this second. I'll look them up while you're writing.
I got them here if you want me to read them now, Kirk.
Please do. Thank you, Karen.
Bodhidharma says, self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the genuine, all-pervading Dharma, not being stingy about a single thing is called the precept of not sparing the Dharma assets.
Not being stingy.
Dogen says, one phrase, one verse, that is the 10,000 things and 100 grasses, one Dharma, one realization. That is all Buddhas and ancestral teachers. Therefore, from the beginning, there has been no stinginess at all.
From the beginning. Stinginess, yeah. Okay, great. Well, we take about 5 minutes and see what comes up. I'll ring a bell.